Civil rights, LBJ. In the 2 years following MLK's speech, his I Have a Dream speech, we see some despair, we see some accomplishment, and some optimism in regards to the civil rights movement. However, this is really going to be shattered with the assassination of JFK in November of 1963. But then after that, we're going to get Lyndon B. Johnson. I'm going to go ahead and give some spoilers here before we jump into civil rights a bit more. Lyndon B. Johnson is going to push through Kennedy's legislative agenda, and this is going, and really just so much more than his legislative agenda. In a way, Kennedy dying almost becomes a blessing for Kennedy's ideas, because then there's this idea of that we have to fulfill as a nation all of the things Kennedy wanted us to do. And so we're going to see this in regards to like the space race, but also in regards to civil rights and so much more. And LBJ, I'm not gonna lie, definitely uses this to push these kinds of items through. So looking at JFK's assassination, we have to jump to Dallas in 1963. Kennedy is going to visit Texas basically to raise money and patch up some feuds amongst Texas Democrats. He actually spent his last night in a Fort Worth hotel, and that's where there's that downtown Fort Worth, there's a statue of Kennedy there because it's outside the hotel that he stayed at the last night before he was riding in a car through the streets of Dallas. When he was going through the streets in Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald had basically stationed himself at the window of the 6th floor of this Texas school book depository, and he is going to fire 3 shots. This would wound Texas Governor John Connally, and it would kill JFK. There's a famous photo actually of this. Unfortunately, I can't include it here because of potential copyright issues, but Jackie Kennedy is in her famous pink outfit and she's reaching out across the back. It's because when JFK was shot, part of his head literally flew off, and so she wasn't trying to escape the shooter. She was actually trying to grab some of JFK's skull and everything. So, this will kill the president. Police are going to arrest Lee Harvey Oswald, and Kennedy was treated in vain, and LBJ is going to take the oath of office fairly quickly. What's even crazier is that 2 days after this, Oswald was being led from one jail cell to another when Jack Ruby kills Lee Harvey Oswald with a handgun in full view of TV cameras rolling. Because Oswald is killed, a lot of people think there's more to the story of him assassinating Kennedy. Partly because Oswald just seems too insignificant to be responsible for all of this on his own. However, we're really going to go with Occam's razor at this point. All theories remain unproven, and so until we get evidence otherwise, logic holds that basically the simplest explanation is usually the best explanation, and therefore, as far as we know and are concerned, especially in this class, Oswald was acting alone. If you want to go look up conspiracy theories in your own time, that's absolutely fine, but I'm not going to talk about those because that's what they are at this time. 5 days after the death of JFK, LBJ is going to claim Kennedy's progressive plans and his new administration for his own, and he proclaims, "Let us continue." So it's very much let's promise to implement all of Kennedy's policies. But we have to keep in mind, LBJ is not the same as JFK. LBJ lacked Kennedy's polish and easy relations with like the Eastern elite. LBJ gets a really bad rap during his time in office when we look at foreign affairs. LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, did not understand foreign affairs. And to be fair, the Vietnam War was also extremely complicated. And so if you go ask people who were alive and like during LBJ's time in office, they will tell you that LBJ was very much hated, and many of them might still even hate him to this day, kind of thing. That being said, history is generally looks back pretty favorably on LBJ because he really was a master of domestic policy. LBJ, giving you a little background, which, by the way, if you ever get a chance to go to the LBJ Presidential Library down in Austin, please go to it. It's an excellent institution that I would recommend to anyone to go. I'm not going to lie, I cried at some of the exhibits because they were just so well. So LBJ was brought up in rural Texas, but he was very ambitious, but he was also ruthless, and really he was very personally crude. We have things like interviews of him while he was literally on the toilet and such. He was very much a smartass and things like that, and so he, like I said, did not have that polish and that finish that JFK had. But the thing is, LBJ was he was deeply committed to social equity. He was a firm believer in the principles of the New Deal, and really, if you were trying to find like the true heir of FDR, LBJ would be that. At least when it comes to domestic policy and such. Kennedy's domestic agenda had been similar to Truman's, with initiatives that had been stalled or gutted by conservatives. And Kennedy's furthest reaching initiative actually was rooted in the issue of poverty being a really persistent United States problem. And so Johnson is going to make Kennedy's anti-poverty package his own, and Johnson declares unconditional war on poverty. Now, the core of his program is going to be the OEO, which is the Office of Economic Opportunity, but it's going to operate things like the Job Corps for school dropouts, the Neighborhood Youth Corps for unemployed teenagers, the Head Start program that would prepare poor children for school, and the VISTA, which is VISTA, or Volunteers in Service to America. You also get like a Domestic Peace Corps, and the biggest effort to community action agencies that's going to provide like health and educational services. So this is a lot more than what Kennedy necessarily had. And then you get civil rights. LBJ is going to commit to civil rights. The thing is, he viewed segregation as a huge issue because he felt like it deprived African Americans, of course, access to opportunity, but he also recognized that it distracted a lot of white Southerners from their own poverty and their own underdevelopment. So this is going to bring about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, technically, this was introduced by Kennedy, but LBJ is the one that's going to enact it. He's the one that's going to make sure that all the votes are lining up. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 basically prohibited segregation in public accommodations. So it's prohibiting segregation in places like hotels, restaurants, gas stations, theaters, parks. It also is going to outlaw employment discrimination on federal assisted projects and create the EEOC. Now, the EEOC was the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it's going to have a list of categories that are basically protected against discrimination. And actually, in this list of categories, you don't just have race, you also have gender included as well. The thing is, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, civil rights is going to move towards the vote, and specifically voter registration. You have to keep in mind the political system at this point is using things like rigged literacy tests and really a lot of intimidation to keep Black Southerners from voting. So the goal with moving civil rights towards politics is trying to increase the number of African American votes, because the power of the ballot box would help Black Southerners be able to take control of their own communities. It also would benefit the Democratic Party, because there's an element of moving towards civil rights could mean that certain white Southerners would drift away from the Democratic Party and move more towards the anti-integration Republicans. So there's an element of losing those voters, but replacing them with Black voters. So we get a lot of peaceful demonstrations, especially in like January of 1965. And these peaceful demonstrations would be met with massive arrests, basically. You get jails holding thousands of Black people whose literally only offense was marching to the courthouse so that they would demand the vote. Marchers would be openly attacked with cameras rolling, though. At that point, LBJ would address a joint session in Congress, and he would demand a voting rights law. This is when Johnson is going to be able to sign the Voting Rights Act on August 6th of 1965. This law outlaws literacy tests, and it provides for federal voting registrars in basically states where the registration or turnout in 1964 had been less than 50% of the eligible population. So when we're looking at less than 50% of the eligible population are voting, this applies actually to 7 specific Southern states. When they go there to register voters, unsurprisingly, Black registration is going to jump largely. This is where we're going to get to 1964 here. LBJ is going to be the peace candidate come the election of 1964, and then we're going to have to be looking at Vietnam, though, as a big issue.